welcome to Booktopia.
Thank you.
Now, you've been interested in science and technology and robotics and the body for a while, haven't you? But I heard you talking the other day on the radio about how you don't actually know what a book is about until you've written it. So at what point in the writing of this book did you sort of realise what your themes and preoccupations were?
Once I started writing, I guess it moved towards the things that I've been thinking about for years and years and years. But actually pulling them together into a novel that made any sense would have been several drafts in. Because I write in the dark, and I just let whatever comes out come out. That means a lot of throwing away, a lot of material that I write and throw away. But I think that's necessary for the way that I write, and there are planners, I know, but I'm not one of those, unfortunately. But I think probably I had a draft and I could see that it was so much about the body, and it was so much about what we're doing to the body, that I just let that go, and that started to bring in things, because if you talk about the body now, you can't not talk about technology, because we're not only absorbing technology, we're moving out into technology, and it is truly becoming one with us.
Yes. Okay, so introduce us to the three characters who are central to the wonders. Introduce us, in essence, to the wonders themselves.
Yes, well, they're not wonders to begin with, of course. So Leon is someone who's had a congenital heart disease, which he only discovers in his 20s when he dies, and is brought back to life, has a transplant that fails, and he falls to the bottom of the transplant list, and his chances of getting another heart are pretty much hopeless. And he's offered an illegal operation, which he takes. Why wouldn't you? Well, there are people who didn't. But he takes it, and he ends up, after a long, arduous time, with multiple surgeries and necrotic tissue in his chest, having a metal heart that you can actually see. So there's a hole through his chest and you can see the heart. Catherine, on the other hand, had a different kind of disease that was treated by experimental gene therapy. And the gene therapy had some gene splicing in it, and something happened, and she was cured, but she started to grow very fine, curly black wool on her body, which at first looked frightening and dreadful, and she was chased by current affairs shows and tormented and treated like a monster. And the third person is Christos, who is a performance artist and a body techno artist. And he's had ceramic lilies implanted into his back, inside which are wet joints, and metal wings can be inserted into those joints, and he can manipulate the wings with the muscles in his back. So he can't fly, it's not about that. He is truly about what we can do with the body and technology, but he can manipulate them and make these wings move and grasp things.
Now, in earlier times, these three people, had they existed, had there been the technology to make them like this, but let's say any three people with any kind of unusual characteristics like these would have been part of a freak show. They would have been part of a travelling circus.
Yes.
And that might have been the only way, in fact, that they might have been able to earn a living. In your book, they become part of, I suppose, the 21st century equivalent of that, don't they? So how do they kind of parlay or leverage these circumstances?
Well, it's interesting because I think we do actually still have freak shows very like the old freak shows, but they're the ones that are something like Embarrassing Bodies on television, or My Shocking Story, which are stories about mainly people in the third world, because they're the people who don't have access to medical treatment, and they're people who are called Tree Man because he's covered in warts, or Octo-Man because he has a vestigial twin left inside him and some limbs. And we're happy enough to watch that on television where no one can watch us watching. So it's all about what we're allowed to look at we're allowed to look at that there, but if we were to go and stand in a sideshow and watch those people, we would be ashamed and embarrassed. So in order to make the three wonders wondrous, they had to be both made, they're beautiful in terms of their faces already, but they had to be made beauteous and wondrous and marketed as not a freak show, but a show of wonder.
They're packaged by a very savvy manager who employs PR people and has a kind of whole team to create an image for them. And in that way, really, this is a wonderful fable or parable about the nature of celebrity today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Anyone can become a celebrity. So, I mean, the obvious ones that make me wonder are people like the Kardashians, who do nothing, are not more beautiful than the people I see in the street, have no particular talent and no particular great intelligence, and yet they've become celebrities because they've been packaged that way. Or someone like Paris Hilton, who was wealthy enough but really became a celebrity because she put out a porno tape. And so she did it by becoming outrageous.
So are you in a way, Paddy, saying that in fact nothing has changed and that we are still living in a carnival today, and that our appetite for freaks and for that kind of circus is still just as strong, and that is demonstrated by the tabloid culture that we live in?
I don't think it will ever change. I don't think we can stop looking at people. And I think we are so fascinated by difference that we will always be certain. It's like when you see someone with a body that is unusual, you can't help but look at them.
Whether it's perfect or grotesque.
Yes, exactly. So whether it's a supermodel or someone who has an extra limb, your eye will be snagged by them and you can't help but look. We're just, novelty intrigues us. And but in the way that we're taught to behave, we're not allowed to stare. We're not allowed to stare at things that people think are ugly. And it's really, what is ugly? So we're getting a narrower and narrower idea of what is beautiful. In the olden day freak shows, I think, although they were called freak shows and they did have people who had bizarre bodies, and often they were faked, of course, but there was more of a sense of wonder about it. And back in the 15th and 16th century, and earlier, of course, then they were considered to be miracles of God. So that division of ugly bad and beautiful in a very narrow sense good, I think, is getting stronger and stronger. And that is partly to do, I'm sure, with media and the images that we're fed every day.
So what are you saying then about the way ethics and our kind of moral framework has to scramble to try and catch up with technology and with the progress in medicine, whether it's genetic engineering or any other kind of progress that we're making? We're always lagging behind, aren't we, in terms of how we think about what is right and what is wrong?
We're lagging behind, and sometimes we never catch up. And the people who are making the advances in technology usually are doing them for what they think are the best reasons. But the trouble is, we often don't hear about them until the deed is done. And sometimes that may be a bomb, or that may be something inserted into the body that they really don't know the full effect of what will happen when that is put in.
Do you think we're going to end up in future with a sort of two-tier society where we're going to have people who've just had masses of amounts of work done and who are completely lifted and ageless and sort of have had themselves engineered to be beautiful according to some stereotype, and then we're going to have the equivalent of the poor, people who have decided they can't afford it or don't want it, who are just going to wander around looking the way we look here and now, you and I.
That's right.
Is that what we're going to end up with? We're going to end up with a kind of two-tier society of these sort of almost inhumanly perfect beings, and then the rest.
I wonder if the inhumanly perfect will become so banal that it will become more interesting to see someone who has a little difference in them. It's that kind of thing of, it is difference that draws the eye. And a lot of the models that you see become models not because they have that perfect symmetrical face, of course they do, but they have a feature that is very unusual. And people get sick of looking at the same face and the same teeth and the same nose and the same eyes. So I can't see that it will end up that way. But I think obviously for a while the tendency has to go that way just because of the way, the increasing gap between rich and poor. But also you read a lot about people who don't have a lot of money who will save and save and save, and rather than spend their money on whatever they need to live, they will get a breast enhancement. So how long can that go on, really?
Yes, and now it's become one of the sorts of rites of passage for girls that, mothers will buy daughters for a 16th or an 18th birthday present a new nose.
I know, I find that horrifying. Yeah.
I want to ask you one particular question about Catherine, Woolly Catherine, because I know that she's the character that in a way you felt kind of closest to in the writing of the book. You said something very interesting the other day about how you were writing this book at the time that Julia Gillard was going through her incredible sort of fall.
Yes.
And I was just wondering whether you could extrapolate a little bit about how Catherine and Catherine's circumstances were impacted by what you were watching happen to Julia Gillard, because that's quite an unusual sort of combination.
Yes, it is. And so Catherine was a fully formed character before the Julia Gillard business started happening. And I was writing and redrafting, and all of these comments about women started floating to the top of the Australian commentary. And I started to get that sense, and I think a lot of women did, that there is a very deep level of hatred and fear of women expressing their sexuality and their power and an intellectual capacity. And I don't know where it comes from. I suppose it's a sort of reaction to the sense that your power is being taken away or something. But I had never felt before that sense that I am despised for my gender. Truly despised. I mean, that's the way people were talking about women at that time. Of course, there was a huge reaction against it, which was wonderful, but seeing it out there, it so blatantly out there, and I did start thinking about the way women are treated in celebrity culture, and it seemed to me inevitable that someone as sexy and someone who had been treated as an animal when she first started to change and then became a very sexy, desirable object would just generate a huge amount of fear in people who were wary of women.
One of the other things that I think is so interesting about the dynamic in the book between the three of them is the way you tease out the sort of jealousies and petty rivalries and the irritations between them. So I felt like I was watching a rock band that were on tour, and they'd been on the road in the bus, crammed together for too long, and they were kind of getting really scratchy with each other.
I'm so fascinated by how people work together in a group. It's in any situation where you get people together day after day after day, and they're not related, but they're forced into this place and they have to learn to live together somehow, and personalities do scratch and itch and irritate, and everyone who's ever worked in a workplace will have experienced some level of that kind of friction. And how people work it out, I think, is amazing. And they do work it out if they have enough grace and hope. And when you've found people who you can rub along with in that way, in an honest way, they become like family. And you make your own family in those places, I think.
Paddy O'Reilly, thank you very much.
Thank you.